passage today because we know from Scripture God means for us to be blessed. Jesus says flat out in John chapter 10:10 that he came that we might have life and have it abundantly. But I think right now there are an awful lot of people who feel like something else is going on. This just doesn't feel very abundant for very many people. But our text today has Jesus pronouncing blessing. It has Jesus pronouncing blessing. It's kind of a form of abundance, as only Jesus can. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at this idea of blessing or abundance, even in the midst of an awful lot of turmoil and uncertainty. Our passage for today is probably a familiar one to many. It's the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. If you have your Bible and you want to open up and turn to that, turn to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to read Matthew 5, 1 through 12, the beginning verses of the Sermon on the Mount. And here we hear these words. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This is the word of the Lord. Now, when I saw this passage listed for the service today, it made me wonder a little bit. I think that people in general really want to be blessed. We want to know that blessing. Maybe now more than ever. But when we hear what Jesus has to say about those who are blessed, let's be honest. Do all of you want to be blessed for the things that Jesus says you might be blessed for? I think that's a little bit of a tough question under any circumstances, and maybe more so in the world that we're living in today, when it seems like there's so much going on, so much that causes anxiety and doubts and worries. Maybe how we want to be blessed, or that we want to be blessed, depends on what we understand it is to be blessed. What does it mean for us to be blessed? Some translations, you're reading Matthew chapter 5. Some translations, the Greek word is translated not blessed, but happy or fortunate or satisfied. And that's in there. To ask for God's blessing or to pronounce someone blessed is in some way to pronounce or to ask for happiness or fortune or satisfaction. But really here it goes so much deeper than that. The Greek word underneath blessed in Matthew is makarios. Very interesting. The root of this word that is built upon at its base means large or lengthy. The foundation of what it means to be blessed is large or lengthy. If we look at the Hebrew equivalent, go back to the Old Testament, the Hebrew equivalent of this word is the Hebrew word ashar, which the root there that is built on what it means to be blessed in the Old Testament is that one is on the right road. I thought that was incredibly profound when we think about the Beatitudes that Jesus pronounces, that somehow we're living large, somehow we're on the right road if there are certain conditions. So we have this as a base, we have this as a foundation. What this word blessed has come to mean, the way it's used here as it's been interpreted over time, the one who is blessed is or will be well. The person who is blessed or will be blessed is or will be well. They will be fortunate, or they are fortunate, even to the extent of happiness. Here's the key: because of God. Because of God. Because of God, there's a largeness about their life. Because of God, there's a sense of things are on the right track, even if it's not apparent to others. The one who is blessed is privileged, not because of their particular state of being. Often they are blessed or privileged despite the state that they find themselves in. They are blessed not because of who they are or because of what they have necessarily done, but they are blessed because primarily of who God is and what God has done. To be blessed is something that is right now. It's present, but it also there's an aspect, and maybe the larger part of it, is future-oriented. So, does that clear it all up for you? Does that make it perfectly plain? Good. There's at least one person. But for most of us, if it's still a little bit of a fuzzy thing, that's completely understandable, and it's okay. You can live out your life in complete faithfulness, trusting in God, and be blessed, and not quite understand the word itself. I thought of a little illustration, though, that maybe gives you a little bit of insight into what it means to be blessed. And this is a partial illustration, or it works in part. I'll tell you where we get off track with it in a moment. But how many football fans out there? I won't ask you what team, because there's only really one, right, Tim? It's the Steelers. There's only one team. But, okay, football fans, baseball fans, basketball fans, whatever your favorite professional sport is, you're rooting for your team, and when your team is winning, yes, this is awesome, great. And they're having a great year, you're having a great year. But every sports fan knows, every person who favors a certain team knows that sooner or later, their team has an off season. I wasn't thinking about Mannheim when I wrote this, by the way, but yeah, okay. Every team somewhere sooner or later has an off season, and sometimes it gets absolutely brutal. Have you ever lived through a season and you're thinking, can it please just be over? This is so bad. But even in the midst of the worst season that your team is having, some people eventually get to the point where, okay, there's a little tiny silver lining. There's a little bit of hope because our team is tanking. It's going awful. It's insane. But at least we're going to have a really good draft pick come spring or come draft time. So you're in the midst of this horror and disappointment and ugliness, but even in the midst of that, you can still see a little bit of sunshine, a little ray, a little bit of hope, and maybe there's something even better coming. Now, this is where my illustration falls apart, because you know, if you follow sports, you may get that number one draft pick, and sometimes they are a bust, and so that doesn't work out. With God, the hope that we have now is sure. With God, the hope that we have for the future is absolutely certain. God does not fail. But I hope you get the idea that the person who is blessed, despite even the craziest of circumstances, has a cause for hope, for joy. There's at least a way in which they feel well, they feel okay in the midst of whatever they're in, and they really have something to look forward to in the future. So that said, let's take a look at these blessings that Jesus pronounces. Jesus pronounces 9 in all in our passage today. Now, individually, each and every one of these is compelling in its own way. You could do a sermon on each and every one very easily. In total, they can move us even more. These are some very special blessings that Jesus pronounces. We're going to go quickly through them, so take a deep breath or listen quickly. In verse 3, Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Who are these people who are poor in spirit? Well, some people, following what Jesus says in Luke, see them as literally poor people. You see, in Matthew we have the Beatitudes, but in Luke there's another version. Luke remembers too, and he shares some. They remember things just a teensy bit different. Luke just says, blessed are the poor. So there's some people who think that the poor in spirit are those who are literally poor. They don't even have change to jingle in their pockets. And the Greek word that we're talking about here, poor in spirit, poor, is patokos. It suggests a beggar. So blessed are those people who are beggars in the spirit. Most people see that these people, the poor in spirit, are not only, or they're not just poor monetarily, they're poor in the sense that they sense their spiritual need. They realize their great spiritual need. They realize that they, spiritually speaking, they are beggars. They see themselves as completely unworthy. They see themselves as utterly dependent upon God. Maybe in part due to a lack of physical wealth of any kind, but not necessarily so, not limited to that. These are people in Jesus' day, for really quite a bit of time on either side of Jesus. These are people who would have been looked down on in Roman society. They were some pretty unfortunate souls. But God promises them the kingdom of heaven. Note the great reversal that is happening here. This is something we see in a number of these Beatitudes, in a number of these blessings. The lowest of low is lifted to the heights. The lowest of low is lifted to the heavens. Verse 4, Jesus pronounces, blessed are those who mourn. Here we are today remembering brothers and sisters in Christ gone on in just the last year. And I know that probably everybody out there has lost someone that you know, that you love, and it brings sadness. Anyone who has lost someone, who has experienced grief, knows at best grief, mourning, feels maybe like relief if you can recognize death as an escape from physical suffering, trusting Jesus' work on the cross. It's hard to think of mourning, that condition of mourning, as being blessed. But here again, Jesus pronounces a tremendous reversal, a great reversal. Those who are mourning, they will be comforted. But it really isn't this simple. It's not as simple as you lost someone you love, you're sad now, you're mourning now, you're in grief now. It's going to be okay, and you'll get better. You'll be happy. It's really more than just that. All of these blessings that Jesus pronounces, all of these blessings have a deep root in the Old Testament. That was Jesus' foundation. When we consider the foundation that Jesus built on, we easily see mourning here is not primarily for those who have died. Rather, mourning is for someone's sins. People in the Old Testament, they would mourn over their sins, or they might mourn for misery in general. You think about Job. He spent time in mourning, in sackcloth and ashes with his friends and before God, mourning and wailing and weeping over the general state of misery that he was living in. You will find many examples in the Old Testament of people putting on sackcloth and ashes. They're mourning, they're distraught over the sins or the humiliation of Israel, of God's special chosen people. What we understand from this beatitude here is that those who are distressed in mind, in heart, in soul, for the wrongs, the injustice that they see, whatever the source, and whatever or whoever is injured, these whose hearts are troubled are blessed, because they will be comforted. You're mourning the sin, you're mourning the injustice, you will be comforted. If not now, when God, through Jesus, makes all things right. When His will is perfectly, completely accomplished. The meek in verse 5 are very similar to the poor in spirit. These are ones who are humble toward God in all things. These two understand the need that they have, the dependence that they have on God. These folks, they're often very overlooked. They're passed by the world. Jesus says one day they will inherit that world, which when it's all said and done, to say that you will inherit the world means that in the end, you're going to inherit heaven, because in the end, earth and heaven are one. Again, we have the great reversal. The low are lifted up. God, not us, reverses things. We don't pick ourselves up by our bootstraps when we're down. God reverses. In verse 6, we hear that those who hunger and thirst for righteousness will be satisfied. Now, these are people, believers, who are longing. They're yearning for God to make things right. They look at the world around them and they see brokenness and they see injustice. Do you see any of that today? It's all around. So many things are broken. So many things are unjust. There's an awful lot of people who just don't seem to be concerned or to care about it. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are longing to see God make things right. They are driven. They desire to see God's will be done, as Jesus prayed and taught us to pray when he gave the Lord's Prayer. That Jesus pronounces the merciful as blessed should be no surprise. Mercy is a very important idea in the Old Testament. In fact, 2 times in Matthew, Jesus, that's Matthew 9 and Matthew 12, Jesus quotes Hosea 6:6, where Jesus says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And the parable that Jesus teaches about the servant who is forgiven that incredible debt we had weeks ago, the servant who's forgiven that incredible debt, has something to say about the subject of mercy as well. We should show mercy. If we do, we will receive it. And Jesus states that so clearly here. Blessed are the merciful, they shall receive mercy. In a world that very often thinks first of itself and often of very little else, mercy is often in short supply, and it ought not to be that way. The pure in heart, verse 8, are those not perfect, no one is perfect, but those who are living out their faith from the heart, not just on the surface. More than that, they are dedicated, they are devoted, single-minded about serving God. These folks who are pure in heart do not serve 2 masters. For them, there is only one, and that is God. The peacemakers in verse 9 are those who follow Jesus' example. They follow Jesus' example to work at reconciliation wherever there is need. Whether that need is in one person or whether it is between people or between someone or some group and God, wherever there is division, these folks are working to bring about reconciliation. It's interesting to note here, these people that Jesus is speaking to, all the people, in fact, of that day were supposedly living under the Pax Romana. All people were supposedly living under the peace of Rome. But you know, the peace of Rome was won through war, violence, and oppression, and the result was by no means equal or just. There were those who had and those who did not. There were the fortunate few, and there were untold numbers of slaves and people oppressed. Jesus pronounces blessed those who work at making peace, peace as God would have it. Not some false physical peace, not some hollow political accord, but a deep, abiding, uniting spiritual connection and well-being between people and God. Now, I know I'm flying through these here, but you listen to these and you're thinking, man, there's a lot of hard stuff in there. There's a lot of hard things there for us to think about if we would be blessed. And if we aren't sure that we want to be the person who receives, if we want to be the person who receives these blessings because of the way that we receive them, I think the last 2 blessings that Jesus pronounces are the hardest. The last 2 where Jesus says, blessed are you when you're persecuted, when people say things against you, and when they insult you, and when they lie about you. Now, not only will these people receive the kingdom of heaven, and that gives us a nice little bookend from the first blessing, the poor in spirit will inherit the kingdom of heaven, but these last people, they have an instruction on top of it as well. They should rejoice and be glad. They should rejoice and be glad. Think about it. I won't ask you to tell me who, what, when, or why, but just yourself. Think of the last time that somebody gave you a hard time, that somebody really maybe put you down, that somebody, you felt attacked, you felt persecuted, you felt insulted, somebody lied about you, something was going on. Was your first reaction, yay, God, hey, woohoo? Were you rejoicing because of whatever was said to you? Were you glad because of whatever it was that you heard that you couldn't believe? That's not normal. But that's what Jesus is instructing. He's telling you you're blessed when that happens to you, and you should rejoice because you're blessed. Whew. All in all, we read these blessings that Jesus pronounces, and don't you wish that it could just be a little bit simpler, a little bit more straightforward? Don't you wish that we didn't have to endure so much so that we might receive some of these blessings? I know I do. I mean, the world is tough enough. Does it have to be this tough to receive the blessings of God? Well, the fact that the world is so tough and uncertain right now, and that we receive blessing in uncertain times and uncertain situations, is exactly the thing that we should be grabbing onto, because we are living in such uncertain and difficult times, and because we do endure so much uncertainty and so much difficulty. We should be praising God that there is blessing available, despite the brokenness and the need that we see in the world, and the brokenness and the need that we know and we find in ourselves. This should not scare us. It should inspire us to strive to live any and all of these things that we can. Because no matter how bad it might seem on the surface, no matter how bad it might seem underneath, if we're living the way that God would have us to live, difficult as it might be, we're blessed, and God is going to reward, and God is going to give us good things. You know, what Jesus describes is actually an answer to the world for the follower. Jesus gives us an alternative way to live and be in the world and with the world. He gives us an alternative way to live and be in the present moment and for the future, where the believer, where we are lifted up and we can rise above it all, even if nothing else is changed. And that picture, those promises are every bit as real and relevant when Jesus spoke them so long ago as they are today. I think this passage and this idea is so very timely right now. We've been talking about it. We've been praying about it. I know it consumes very many people. We've been living through all kinds of COVID craziness and disruption and anxiety. Right now, the thing that is dominating so many people's minds are elections on Tuesday. Actually, the election's been happening for a month and a half with mail-in early stuff, and it's going to go on past Tuesday. Who knows how long it will be until it all gets sorted out. There are very many people that after Tuesday, or after finally there's a proclamation made, that are not going to be very happy. Some are going to be distraught, absolutely distraught. Some in here may, and on the other side, your friends or family might be just overjoyed. No matter what the unrest, no matter what the difficulty, no matter what the anxiety, remember this, that in the midst of it all, God sees you, God knows you, and God means to bless you. He blesses us and will bless us in the most difficult of circumstances. He will bless us despite the world. That should give us some comfort in this uncertain time, that if we do things God's way, hard as it might seem, hard as it might be to endure, there's blessing in store. Because some people see these blessings as just that. They're pronouncements, they're just blessings. Some see these things as a guide for how we should live. Some see these as kind of the entrance requirements for how it is that we get into heaven. I'm guessing it's probably like all of those things all wrapped together. What we need to do, what we need to understand is read them and take them to heart. Take them to heart for how we live, but also take these things to heart as an affirmation that God's grace is available to us all. God's grace is at work in our lives at all times, even in the most difficult and uncertain of times and circumstances, if our lives are directed by Him and toward Him. You know, it is absolutely understandable if people today struggle and if they question even things of God and faith. But the answer to the question, blessed, really? Is absolutely yes. Absolutely, you are blessed if you are living by faith. We may not always see it, we may not always feel it or understand it. Sometimes we may have to wait for it, and we may have to wait for it a lot longer than we would like. But the blessing is real and certain with Jesus, with God. When I was working on this, something came to mind. Brother of Christ here at Ruhl's church, I won't say the name, but some of you will know instantly. Talk to this person, walk up to them, they walk up to you and say, "How you doing?" Blessed by the best. Blessed by the best. You know, we are blessed by the best, even at a time like this, if we live by our faith. The answer to that question, blessed, really? For all who follow, yes, blessed by the best. Amen. As we move to our time of prayer, I'd like to share a brief little